No one's going to deny the SEC's depth this year. Okay. Let's just put that up front. No one's going to deny it. 14 of 16 teams are playing to try to get to the NCAA tournament and all have a case for it. In terms of the top 25, there are Auburn, Tennessee, Florida, and Alabama are the top 4 teams. They're all in the top 10. Just behind them, you've got Missouri, Kentucky, Texas A&M, and Mississippi State. Half the SEC's in the top 25. It's the deepest it's ever been, and many people are calling this the deepest conference in history. However, KenPom, the KenPom ratings, Ken Pomeroy, the designer of the KenPom ratings, the analytic genius, has a post up that, of course, Danny Cannell had to share because Danny Cannell likes to troll, that questions whether or not the SEC is overrated. Now, let me say this up front. This article that I'm about to quote to you, and that the details of it that I'm about to break down, provide no evidence that the SEC is overrated. Literally none. What they provide is evidence that the metrics we use to rate conferences in the regular season are overrated. So let's get to it. First, based on non-conference play, the SEC is not the best league of the modern era. Okay, that actually would go to the ACC in 1997. The ACC had an 865 winning percentage, and but when you add margin of victory of 18.2, that's better than the SEC. The SEC does have an 889 win percentage, but margin of victory is 18. When you add it all together, the ACC is actually deeper than the SEC. More importantly, though, the 3 best conferences of all time in the regular season are the ACC in 97, the SEC this year, and the Big 12 in 2024. As Ken Pomeroy points out, the other 2, the ACC and the Big 12, had major flameouts in the NCAA tournament that year. In 97, North Carolina was a 1 seed. They lost in the Final Four. Duke as a 2 seed, lost in the second round. Wake Forest is a 3 seed, lost in the second round. Clemson is a 4 seed, lost in the Sweet 16, ironically led by Rick Barnes. Maryland is a 5 seed, lost in the first round. And Virginia is a 9 seed, lost in the first round. So the ACC was the deepest conference and had only 1 team get past the first weekend. The Big 12 in 2024, just last year, was a bigger embarrassment. That was a horrible flameout, okay? The Big 12 last year did not have 1 team get out of the Sweet 16. They had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 teams make the NCAA tournament. None of them made it out of the Sweet 16. 6 of the 8 failed to get out of the first weekend. It was a massive flameout. KenPom brings up some data that's kind of interesting. Here's the first point. The data we use to rank conferences effectively ends on January the 1st. Why do we say that? Anything that happens after January 1st is largely conference play with maybe an exception here or there. A conference is not going to be able to boost its value within conference play against each other. They're just not. That's not how that works. So any improvements that conferences make, any improvements that teams make in conferences that you don't see in November and December when non-conference play is happening, it's not going to affect or help the conference ratings because they're only those improvements. The only teams that it come at a cost of are the other conference teams. So this conference rating stuff that they do based on non-conference play for college basketball to determine the deepest conferences already is a really flawed system given the fact that it ends in December because conference teams are just playing each other starting in January. I do agree with KenPom on that, and that is where you could question with the SEC because we have no idea what other conferences have called up to the SEC with teams getting better because all they've been doing is playing each other, and the conference play against each other in November and December are the biggest deals. On top of that, I mean, you have conferences that have a history of flat out flaming out in the NCAA tournament. Now, I have a theory on why a lot of times conferences that are so loaded flame out in the NCAA tournament because it happens more than you think. I think the mental draining of facing each other in the regular season, even if the conferences are a bit overrated based on what happened in November and December, it's mentally draining to constantly see yourself having to face top 25 teams weekend or, every Wednesday and Saturday, every Tuesday and Saturday. I mean, Tennessee, I think, has only had 1 game this year, only 1, that was not either on the road against a team with a winning record or at home against a top 25 team in SEC play. That's just mentally draining to constantly get yourself up for the game. And by the time the NCAA tournament comes, you're worn down and then you flame out. This isn't, I mean, just a quick rundown. The last time people considered the SEC the best conference in basketball was 2003. And that was the year Kentucky went undefeated and won the conference with Keith Bogans. Kentucky had nobody from the conference made the Elite Eight that year. Nobody. I believe there were 6 teams, 6 of 12 made the NCAA tournament. Maybe it was 7 of 12 at the time. I think it was maybe 7 of 12. Let's see, Kentucky, Florida. Well, should have been 7 and 12, but Georgia didn't make it because Georgia got put on probation. But Georgia was a ranked team. Kentucky was a ranked team. Florida was a ranked team. And then on the other side, Mississippi State got in. They were a ranked team with Rick Stansbury. Auburn got in, and Alabama got in. I can't remember if LSU got in or not. I think LSU may have gotten in too. But the reason this is all relevant is because Arkansas and Ole Miss did not get in that year. The reason this is all relevant, yeah, I'm looking back, 17 SEC teams got in. That was when Tennessee was like the 8th team, just missed it. It was John Higgins, Buzz Peterson, Ron Slay years. The SEC flamed out that year too. Not one team made the Final Four. Consistently, the most loaded conferences flame out in the NCAA tournament. It's a regular, recurring thing. So KenPom is not really giving any evidence to say that the SEC is overrated. What he is doing, and I think is fair, is asking the question, is the metric to judge the SEC as the deepest conference overrated this year? I mean, let's just take Tennessee, for example. Tennessee was number 1 throughout non-conference play. They fell into 11-6 in the SEC because of injuries and transfers. Are they really the same team? Like, are they really the same team that was dominating non-conference play? I mean, I'm not so sure. So that's where you have to ask this question. Is the SEC somewhat overrated? It's a what the H. I'm not here to deny that, but it's a valid one. If the SEC is overrated, though, it still appears too loaded to not have some tournament success. Also, I don't think the NCAA tournament is a fair barometer to judge how good a conference is. It's a gimmick. It's one of the biggest gimmicks in sports. I know I'm the grump here. I don't like the NBA where just the better team wins it every single year. The best team wins it. There's absolutely no suspense. But I think other sports sometimes add and allow too much randomness. And I think the NCAA tournament in men's basketball is almost on that other level where too much randomness is allowed. I like it where you have a few teams that are capable of winning it, and then how they play in certain moments will determine if they do. Now, to a certain degree, the NCAA tournament is that way because to be able to win, while you could flame out early as a top team because it's a one and done, and while you could go on a run as an underdog because it's a one and done scenario, to win 6 games in a row, you have to be one of the better teams. That part's true, but it's still a bit of a gimmick. And it leads the NCAA tournament. It makes the NCAA tournament not a fair barometer to judge how good a conference was throughout the year. I mean, you're talking about, you're suggesting with that 3 weeks should outweigh 3 months, 5 months of work. And I'm just not that way. I just don't lean that way. Example for that for you guys is I still maintain that the 2008 to the 2007-2008 Tennessee basketball team that reached number 1, won 30 games and won the SEC regular season title, but lost in the Sweet 16. That's a more beloved team and a more legendary team than the 2009-2010 team that reached the Elite Eight. That 2009-2010 team didn't win the SEC, didn't win 30 games, and never reached number 1. Bruce Pearl's most beloved team is Chris Lofton's senior year, and they lost in the Sweet 16. That's just how that happens. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that per se to judge that way. So while they could be overrated, and there's certainly an argument, I think there's also an argument that using the NCAA tournament as a barometer is not the best, because what you have is, here's what happens when you're judging conferences. You have 2 months of non-conference play, November and December, of epic marquee non-conference games that everybody loves. And then you judge the conferences based on that. Then you have another 2 months of just conference play, and you have nothing to judge the conferences off of. You have no idea who got better, who got worse, whatever. And then you close out with 3 weeks of non-conference play again. It's not really an effective measurement But I would argue that the 2 month, where I would disagree with Pomeroy is that the 2 months of non-conference play in November and December is a more effective way of judging the conferences than 3 weeks of non-conference play in late March when anything can happen. That's just my thoughts on the SEC and the concept of the SEC being overrated. I'm going to go ahead and set that up as a poll question. Could SEC basketball be overrated this year? And you guys let me know, yes or no. But of course, Danny Cannell tried to share it to be a troll. Ken Pomeroy is bringing up a point that these metrics to judge conferences aren't good, not necessarily meaning that the SEC is overrated. And Danny Cannell decided, I'm going to share it to say the SEC is overrated in basketball, because all Danny Cannell does now is try to troll to make a point. It's kind of sad to watch if I'm being honest with you guys.